We have two speakers today who are going to go through all sorts of information about sales and use tax for contractors, and I am going to let them introduce themselves.
All right, my name is Daniel Rains. I'm a sales tax research specialist with the Tax Commission for about 8 years now, and I will let Sean introduce himself.
And my name is Sean St. Marie. I am a sales tax auditor up here in Coeur d'Alene. I've been with the Tax Commission for 5 years now.
So next slide, please. So our webinar overview, we're going to talk about contractor responsibilities. We'll cover briefly the difference between real property versus tangible personal property, basics of sales and use taxes for contractors, some of the different contractor exemptions, and then some of the different ways that we see contractors can get tripped up. So our first, kind of define the contractor. So any prime contractor, subcontractor, or construction manager making improvements on real property. Some examples: road contractors, landscapers, plumbers, framers, painters, roofers, electricians, and well drillers. So the important thing is that we define contractors as the end users of the materials. So the contractors making improvements to real property are the consumers of all the supplies, equipment, and materials that go in to a real property improvement. And so they are required to pay the sales tax or use tax on those materials, unless there is a valid exemption, which we'll cover later in the slideshow. And if they receive owner-supplied materials and nobody paid tax on those, then the contractor is still required to pay use tax on those materials.
So the difference between real property versus tangible personal property here in Idaho is kind of interesting. So the real property aspects are if it's physically or constructively attached to the land, enhances the land's use, or is intended to stay attached to the land throughout its lifetime. Examples of this are buildings, roofs, floors, doors, and then there's the opposite, which would be tangible personal property. These are things that aren't attached or aren't permanently attached. They could be, attached in some aspects. One of those would be signs and trade fixtures. These include freestanding display and trophy cases, detachable wall mats, dry erase marker boards, projector screens, reader boards, things of that nature.
We have a question. Mobile home placed on a rented lot, real or tangible?
So the mobile home would be considered real property. So they have a special taxation on mobile homes. It's 55% of the purchase price in the first sale, and then after that it is just considered a sale of real property.
So the basics of sales and use tax, what's the contractor's obligation? Idaho sales tax law says contractors are the consumers or the end users of the goods that they use. As a result, they must pay sales tax on all purchases, including their equipment, tools, supplies they use to build, improve, repair, or alter real property. Contractors must also pay sales tax when they buy building materials and fixtures. Fixtures include lighting or plumbing fixtures, furnaces, boilers, heating or air conditioning units, refrigeration units, elevators, hoists, awning, bolts, cabinets, countertops, carpet, garage doors, water heaters, etc. Even if the customer is exempt from paying sales tax, as is the case of government agencies, the contractor must still pay tax on his purchases. If a contractor buys or receives equipment and materials on which no one has paid sales or use tax, the contractor owes use tax on those purchases. So again, real property versus tangible personal property. Real property refers to land improvements and fixtures attached to the land, to light poles, sidewalks, fences, dishwashers, and tangible personal property is all property in Idaho that is not real property. Personal property can be seen, weighed, measured, felt, touched, and is perceptible to all senses. So these are just some visual representations of real versus tangible property. Buildings on the left, and then equipment, cabinets on the right. Those would be tangible personal property. So sales and use tax. Sales tax, Idaho code imposes a tax at the rate of 6% of the sales price on all retail sales subject to taxation in the state of Idaho. And then use tax is also 6% on the storage, use, or other consumption of tangible personal property in Idaho. The use tax is a complementary tax to sales tax. Every state that imposes a retail sales tax also imposes a use tax. The use tax is imposed when the purchaser or user of the property in Idaho has not paid sales tax on the purchase of the property. One purpose of the tax is to take away the incentive for purchasers to buy their goods from out-of-state retailers. So this is an example of this would be when you buy something online and the retailer didn't collect sales tax, then use tax would be due.
So basics of sales and use tax. A lot of times contractors can be retailers. Plumbers, electricians, carpet layers, cabinet makers, and mechanical contractors, for example, are usually both contractors and retailers. They are contractors when they install materials in the course of a residential or commercial service call or contract, but when they sell items or materials they don't install, they are retailers and need to collect sales tax from their customers. So the contractors should not collect sales tax if they're installing materials. They should pay it themselves, but if they're just selling the materials to the customer, then they should charge sales tax and remit that to the state. Contractors who are also retailers must ensure that the correct tax is paid, since part of the materials will be subject to tax on cost, and part of the materials will be subject to tax on the sales price to their customer. So they need to keep records to allow the tax to be properly accounted for if they're installing it versus selling it. So we'll talk about some of the different contractor exemptions. And the first one is out-of-state purchase, where sales tax paid equals or exceeds Idaho's rate. So if the contractor has paid tax to another state, correctly paid tax to another state, at a rate equal to or greater than Idaho sales tax, then Idaho tax isn't owed on the materials purchased. If it was less than Idaho's tax, you just owe the difference here in Idaho.
So another contractor exemption, real property improvements in states that don't have a sales tax. A special exemption applies to contractors working in states with no sales tax. These are states like Montana, Oregon, and Alaska. The exemption also applies to contractors working in states that exempt certain real property contracts even though the state has a sales tax. In both cases, contractors don't have to pay tax on materials delivered to them in Idaho as long as those materials will be incorporated into real property on the job in a state with no sales tax on that job. To claim the exemption, contractors must complete Form ST-101, sales tax resale or exemption certificate, and give it to the seller.
Okay. Another contractor exemption, the production exemption, items used in the production process. So if an exempt entity purchases something, that exemption does not extend to the contractor. So the production exemption does extend to the contractor. If they're buying production equipment and parts for that equipment that qualifies for the production exemption, they can purchase those exempt. As long as those parts don't become part of real property, that's another one of the ways we see contractors get tripped up. Production exemption does not apply to real property. Contractors who fabricate production machinery for a manufacturer make tax-free purchases of the materials that become part of the production equipment. They must give the seller a completed Form ST-101. Contractors improving tribal-owned real property. This one can get really complicated, so we definitely encourage anyone working on tribal-owned real property to contact us if you have any questions. A lot of it's not covered in Idaho Code of Rule, a lot of it's federal law, so we need to research it ourselves often. But a contractor who is an enrolled member of a Native American tribe with a job on the reservation may take delivery of materials on the reservation without owing sales or use tax. However, tax applies if the materials are delivered to a Native American contractor off the reservation. A non-Native contractor improving real property on a Native American reservation is usually subject to sales and use tax unless the project is owned by a tribe or a tribal member. Special rules apply to contractors improving real property owned by the tribe or a registered tribal member where the real property is located on a tribal reservation. And again, please feel free to contact the Idaho State Tax Commission if you have any questions about tribal-owned real property. It can get pretty complicated.
The Tax Commission is making an effort to educate contractors so they don't get tripped up. One of the ways that we educate contractors is through our website, educational presentations like this one, also through the Bureau of Occupational Licensing and the Division of Building Safety. We also welcome any comments that could help us reach more contractors. Another way that contractors can get tripped up is with customer-supplied materials. If a customer buys materials for a job and pays sales or use tax, the contractor who installs these materials doesn't owe any additional tax. However, if the owner hasn't paid tax on the materials he gives to the contractor must pay use tax on the value of those materials. This occurs most often when the contractor does work for a project owner who is exempt from paying tax, as is the case of nonprofit hospitals, schools, or government agencies.
Okay, improvements. Improvements to real property. So this was an example of that previous one. State agency hires a private contractor. When the state agency hires a private contractor and installs agency-owned materials into real property, the contractor must still pay tax on the cost of those materials. An example is paint. If the agency provides paint to the contractor owes use tax on the cost of the paint. State agency is required to disclose in the bid proposal that the contractor will owe use tax on agency supplied materials.
So going back to exempt entities, if a customer is exempt from paying sales tax, the exemption doesn't carry over to the contractor. The contractor is still responsible for paying sales or use tax on the materials used for the job, even if the customer is a government entity exempt from Idaho sales use tax. The customer is in an industry granted a sales tax exemption by the Idaho legislature. The customer was granted direct pay authority by the tax commission. A direct pay authority isn't transferable. The customer didn't pay sales use tax on the purchase for any reason.
So another way contractors can get tripped up. We'll get this question sometimes. I collected sales tax from my customer. Do I have to pay tax on my materials? And the answer is yes. So if you're a contractor improving real property, you shouldn't charge sales tax to your customers for materials used to improve real property. You should have either paid sales tax when you bought the materials or paid use tax on the materials you used on a project. And then you can include the cost of that tax in your cost of goods sold, price out the job. One of the reasons we like to bring this one up, it can be pretty kind of painful, is that even if you charge sales tax and collected it, we can still, since it's not the correct tax, we can still require you to pay the use tax that you would have paid on materials, and you wouldn't get a credit for the sales tax you collected from your customer because it was improperly imposed. So that one can be kind of a big issue, so we really try to avoid that one as best as we can.
So another way that contractor can get tripped up is, for example, I'm a retailer who hired a third party to install materials into real property who has to pay tax on the materials. And the answer to that would be whoever contracted to provide and install the materials.
So I took materials from inventory for real property improvement in another state. Do I have to pay tax on those materials? And it does depend, but generally the answer is yes. Unless it's going to a non-taxing state, you still owe Idaho tax even for a project outside the state. You took ownership of those materials here in Idaho.
So some ways for you to stay in touch with us. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. This presentation will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, I believe. So that's one way you can follow us. Another way is to subscribe to our newsletter, and the link is down below there. Another great resource for contractors is tax.idaho.gov/contractors. That's the Tax Commission's website, and we have a whole page dedicated to contractors with a number of hyperlinks that explain different situations. And then you can also contact us directly. Our Boise number is right there. We also have a toll-free number our website. You can email our tax reps, and they're pretty good at answering any of the general questions you might have. You can also fax us, if any of you still have fax machines, that is. And I think that's about it. If you have any questions, let us know.
So if you have a question that you would like to ask on the microphone, please just put it into the chat and we can unmute you. Otherwise, use the chat for any questions and we'll do our best to answer those questions. All right, I see that we have a few people left. If you have questions you're typing in, go ahead and keep, oh, here we got a question. If I buy fence boards and pay sales tax on them and then end up selling those fence boards uninstalled to the homeowner, let's say for extra future repairs, would I need to pay retail sales tax?
If you marked up the price of those fence boards you sold, then yes, you'd want to collect the sales tax from the customer on that full price. And then you could probably want to apply for a refund from the tax commission on the sales tax you paid. If you did have an ST1, if you had a seller's permit, you could go back to the retailer and provide them with your certificate and try to get a refund on that. If you just pass a whole cost, you know, the exact same price you paid on those, and it's just a pass-through of that tax, it's probably okay. Yeah, you'd want to collect, definitely if you marked them up, you want a seller's permit to collect tax from your customer.
Good question. Any other questions?